Hello. I am going to have a look at the Season 14 split tree changes. The goal Riot is trying to achieve with these changes is reducing power from the item system and removing some damage from the game so that combat is longer, more extended, readable, and the stats that champions get for their purpose, for their class, makes more sense in the context of the game. For example, burst mages and assassins should not have access to ability haste as easily, and juggernauts, fighter type characters should have a bit more durability on their items rather than damage so that their lethal thresholds aren't as high, and they can utilize their kits better because of sustained paths. Either way, I also listened to Riot Phreak explain some of the changes they are going to do a few days ago when he posted a video, so I have a pretty good idea about what they're trying to do with a lot of these changes. And they are going to reduce the mobility and damage creep in the game so that different types of characters can function. And if you don't really understand what that means, basically a character such as Mordecai, for example, has a very hard time existing in current League of Legends because not only there's a lot of ways to kite him because of ability haste and movement speed creep in the game, but he's also not very durable because there's too much damage in the game. So often than not, it's a bit of an anti-melee game where this type of characters simply do not get to do even their basic job. Darius, for example, is not in a bad spot right now as a champion, but he often finds himself extremely difficult to play. He cannot even stack his passive in way too many situations. And this has also created this meta indirectly where you are seeing a lot of damage characters, 3 or 4 AD carries per team comp before they have come around with all these nerfs to marksman itemization and runes and whatnot. Doran's Blade, you know what I mean. And that was also allowed because the Malphite or the Ornn that could be on the enemy team was not allowed to have a good play pattern in the game to have his items actually mean enough, not to mention LDR and 40% armor penetration and whatnot. So the counters of sorts weren't even there. Of course, marksmen are supposed to be good against tanks, that's why it was even more suffocating to play. And because nobody is willing to play all of these champions, at least the so-called ELO slaves are not even incentivized to play some tanks in top and jungle. If you cannot itemize tank items on champions that are supposed to build some tank items at some point in the game, such as Hecarim, right now it's really terrible to slot in almost any tank item because you'd rather build more damage or damage plus survivability items such as Desdens, Malmortius, and Stargate, I suppose. When traditionally, this type of characters, since they are one of the tankiest classes in the game, could comfortably build some tank items and they would scale well. Nowadays, it just doesn't really work like that. It's extremely normal to see any kind of fighter, bruiser champion simply build 4, 5 damage items in their completed build, I'm not counting boots, which adds to this problem of having too much damage in the game. There can be a lot of places where they can remove this on different classes. Even support champions. And I think that should be good for the game, even though some people are not going to like it. But if they are doing it in a... because maybe they say that it removes the fun from the game. Or maybe their assassin type character will not function as well. But you will see that it's not necessarily the case with some of these assassin type burst characters. They are actually getting a great deal in this patch. I think I've been talking long enough about this subject. I just want to get it out of the way so we have some kind of understanding of what we are looking to expect in this patch. Okay, we're gonna start with Dagger here, which got buffed 50 gold reduced in the price, and I think that's completely fair because Dagger got somewhat unfair nerf. It wasn't that great of a component anyway, it's just good for the champions that want attack speed in their kits. But it hardly became competitive with longswords, for example, even on characters that scale really well with attack speed. And this is simply, instead of giving it 2% attack speed back, they are instead just reducing the cost a bit, and this also technically reduces the gold value of certain attack speed items such as Phantom Dancer. That is more or less an accurate statement, although it doesn't have to necessarily 100% reflect into the game, if you know what I mean. Then we also have a buff to Fairy Charm and Sapphire Crystal. I don't think there's any problem with buffing these items because they do not have a huge amount of value in the game. You're not looking forward to, wow, I'm gonna build a Sapphire Crystal and feel amazing about it. The component has been pretty much left in the same spot for a very long time, and I do not mind seeing it buffed, especially because if they don't buff Lost Chapter or Catalyst or something like that by a meaningful degree, this sort of change doesn't really matter in essence. If Lost Chapter does the same thing, who cares if Sapphire Crystal is a bit better. The Fairy Charm is supposed to be built on supports. It's a somewhat non-existent stat that sometimes they can scale a bit with. That's completely fine. I don't think anybody will care about Fairy Charm and Sapphire Crystal being a bit cheaper. It's definitely not as meaningful as the dagger change. Now you can even have the possibility of starting 2 daggers. I don't know if anybody's gonna be able to do that, but we might see it happen. I can see Yotsuo or Yone going for a double dagger start in some cases, and that is also going to really accelerate their Berserker increase, because there is also a change to Berserker increase in this patch, but it's not going to be as impactful, so maybe they will not care as much. So there it is. Berserker gives, we got some changes to boots. I assume that Riot is going to further nerf some of the boots because they are looking to reduce the mobility in the game. And you can do that with nerfs to boots a bit. Maybe it's not because of the mobility, it could be simply because they want to remove power from the items and they are looking to do it again with boots, with additional nerfs to boots. And that overall is not a huge issue with the ecosystem as long as you don't make boots too expensive so that people either never upgrade their boots or they never get an option to rush boots before their first legendary. Which I think right now is pretty optimal to always skip boots on most champions until you complete your first legendary. But now they skew it even a bit more towards that, which I think is completely fine. They probably realize that people still rush here to boots a lot, and maybe they want to bring it down even further. It could be a mix of things. I'm not exactly sure what is the logic from Riot Games here. But either way, Berserker gives are getting a 5% attack speed nerf, which is somewhat reasonable considering that the other boots are getting nerfed as well. And Berserker gives especially because before the last set of nerfs, with 35% attack speed, it has been somewhat overpowered for like over 10 years or something. It just gave way too many stats, way too gold efficient. Boots of Swiftness is getting a 75 gold nerf. I really don't mind that they are going a little bit on like niche numbers. They're doing 75, 75, 25 gold here and there. Because I think that is appropriate for these items that are kind of cheap to have something more sharp about their cost. So this is getting nerfed as well, and then you see Ionian Boots of Lucidity is losing 5 haste, is getting 50 gold cheaper. And for some people, these boots might look sort of dead, like wow, this is a pretty big nerf in terms of the stats for only 50 gold. But I think what Riot is trying to do here is make sure that supports have a reasonable upgrade. They want to make it more of a Enchanter, Soraka, Lulu, Janna item, since other boots options aren't very good for them. They just want them to have something cheap, which gives them the tier 2 boot upgrade, so they have the extra movement speed if it's needed. While on the other hand, since other boots are getting nerfed, let's say you play something like volibear, you're still going to go Ionian boots of lucidity a lot of the time, simply because you'll notice in some games, well, they don't have a lot of auto-attackers, maybe their physical damage dealers are more spell-oriented, I don't need steel caps. Maybe you don't have reliable CC, maybe they have knockups or close to nothing, I don't need Mercury Treads. I'm not getting kited, don't need boost of swiftness. I'll rather buy Ionian boots of lucidity simply to get my 45 movement speed from the boots tier 2 upgrade, and we'll just go with some abilities. It's just gonna be the cheapest option. It's still gonna be reasonable for those type of characters, but it's not going to be as broadly as available. And if you are building Ionian boots of lucidity instead of sorcerer shoes on a mage, you are very often trolling now. It's just the trade-off is not really worth it. You're losing way too much of your burst potential, and we know that almost every single mage cares a lot about their burst, and it's very rare cases where Ionian actually helps your burst so that your next spell comes up quicker in a burst rotation. Anyways, plated steel caps received a small buff. I did feel like plated steel caps are maybe a little too over nerfed, so just getting a slight buff is not too bad. On the other hand, Mercury Treads are finally getting their tenacity nerf. Like, Riot went back and forth on this multiple times already, I think, where they tried to make Mercury Treads give only 20% tenacity. They might actually fully go with this change now. Who knows, it might be reverted again. The problem with this type of change, even though I don't mind it, I don't think CC champions should lose a lot of their power budget right away, and especially now since a lot of melee characters are going to be better at gap closing and sticking to targets and having a sustained pattern combat. I think a Mercury Treads nerf could technically be appropriate. Like if they nerf the ability of mages, marksmen, stuff like that to deal with melee champions, because we are really, if you want to believe it or not, outside of a few outliers, we live in a world where playing melee characters is extremely difficult, and most of them have to resort to some kind of cheese split pushing strategy or some kind of glass cannonish build where they look to one-shot someone. It's not the healthiest play pattern right now. So I don't mind tenacity being reduced, even though it's a huge nerf, if they actually balance the game correctly and reduce the outliers. For example, Veigar, Fiddlesticks, Morgana, these type of champions should get their CCs a little bit reduced with compensations on other aspects if needed. For example, they could have lower cooldown on certain abilities, maybe a little bit more damage, something like that. Because otherwise you're not going to be able to move versus Fiddlesticks and Morgana if more of these changes to tenacity keep going through. We have already experienced a lot of nerfs to tenacity already. But one thing I didn't mention is that now you are more inclined to go for the tenacity shard, and we'll see overall the changes, because the HP per level shard will not be as mandatory. The HP per level shard is extremely valuable right now, especially for melee champions, because without it, they often just get nuked way too often. And you'll see that if you try playing with it around on a larger sample size, you play 20 games with tenacity shard on live, and then you see that you'll often just not be able to use the pattern of your champion, especially if it's just kind of like a juggernaut type character. It's gonna be very difficult. Sometimes it's not gonna matter, of course, but it's still super valuable HP. And now because you're gonna have more HP on your items, if people are going to have less damage, then you can go for the nasty shard a bit more often. Also gives slow resistance, so it's really good against slows, because it reduces the amount you get slowed, but also the duration of the slow. Anyways, let's move forward to some components here. So they are looking to clean up the epic item space a little bit. I've been complaining about Caulfield's Warhammer and about Fiendish Codex for a long time now. Caulfield's Warhammer, Fiendish Codex, very inefficient components, just makes no sense that they are this weak. Getting a 50 gold buff on them, it's reasonable enough to make them competitive with other components, especially when you are building into an item that has these things. I don't like to use the word feel that much, because at the end of the day it's something mathematic, but it does feel pretty bad to play the game and have Caulfield's Warhammer be this weak. For example, it's so bad that the build paths are going to change a bit, so I don't know if it's still the same thing, but let's say you are building to speed of shojin, and you can get Kindle Gem plus Caulfield. It's better to buy Ruby Crystal plus... Sorry, it's better to buy Kindle Gem plus 2 longswords than it is to buy Caulfield plus Ruby Crystal always. You just get more stats for Kindle Gem plus 2 longswords. It just doesn't make much sense. At least they pull back on it a bit. I would rather have this be 1k gold, but I understand they don't want you to just have super easy access to ability haste. Either way, Hardbound X is also getting a buff of 100 gold, which is pretty huge. It does make it a lot easier to itemize. And this is direct, because Hardbound X has as much attack speed as 2 daggers. Now since they're buffing dagger by 50 gold, 2 daggers, 100 gold, makes sense. No reason to keep it expensive. Reckless is also getting a nerf, although situationally it's going to be a small buff. It just depends on what breakpoints you'll have on your bases. If you can afford it, it's going to be a buff. In some cases, if you would not be able to afford this 900 gold, yeah, it's going to be a buff. If you can afford only like 800, then it's going to be good for you, I guess. But overall, the efficiency of the item went down a bit, because it's 175 gold for 5 AD, it only got reduced by 125. So this item will have to be 50 gold cheaper to retain the same gold efficiency. Now we're going to get into some legendary items, and you're going to start seeing nerfs to the items and what you're looking to see when they shape. So Black Cleaver, the way I see it, is an item that you can buy on a lot of fighters that actually want to be tanky, look to apply it, and it has to be viable for Juggernaut type champions such as Garen, Darius, Urgot. It has to be good for them, and if it doesn't have a lot of HP, then it's not as functional for them. They might even have too much burst, and once they actually close the gap on you, you are going to get one shot, which tends to happen with the current version of League of Legends right now. When Black Cleaver has 55 AD, it's quite a lot of attack damage for this type of item, and they have been buffing this item many times. Yes, it might be an over nerf to go for 15 AD, because you'll see that most items got nerfed by only about 10 AD. So it might need a buff of 5 AD or 50 HP or something. Doesn't really matter if it's over nerfed or not, it should still be a fine and functional item even in this stage. Because the stat profile is leaned towards HP, which is great. I like this direction for this type of itemization. And on top of that, they kept this item in check to be a viable purchase. If you are playing Ribbon, as you can see, the build path is now Phage, Kindle Gem Pickaxe, one of the best build paths in the game. You can get Pickaxe and Longsword against Malphite as Ribbon, and you are going to be fine about it when you rush this item. If you play a jungler, you're not going to have to go Ruby Crystals like you used to have to build on other iterations of Black Cleaver. You can get a Pickaxe after a successful full clear, and you're going to feel good about your ganks and your clear speed. That's really nice that they're smoothing out Black Cleaver like this. It's even better than the old build, but for Caulfields plus Ruby Crystal. The Blade of Ruking is simply getting a 10 AD nerf. Most of the power is in the passive. This is a reasonable nerf for Blade of Ruking, because again, they're simply nerfing almost every legendary, especially the ones that are solid, popular, overperforming maybe. No problem here. Bloodthirster didn't receive any nerf, they only buffed the shield a bit. I'm not sure it's because they already nerfed the item on live, but they might go and nerf something on it. Who knows, we will have to see. We are gonna have a look at Kempunk Chainsword here. So Kempunk Chainsword, Morello Nomicon. These items do not have a specific passive such as Stormsurge or Mortal Reminder that gives percentage armor pen. Okay, Torment has the damage reflect. Kempunk Chainsword and Morello have nothing besides the Grievous. They do not bring any unique passive. I think that would be the ideal situation to give this champion something useful, because when you play a marksman and you want healing reduction, Mortal Reminder is giving you percentage armor, which is always going to be useful. When you are playing a tank and you want healing reduction in the form of Bramble Thornmail. You are always going to use the reflect passive, no matter who you are up against. Except that, of course, maybe it would be good if there was some kind of healing action item that was magic resist / spell based. That would be an okay niche to be in the game. I wouldn't mind if an item like that existed. Just like they made a magic resist version of Bami's Cinder, which we have asked for a long time to be in the game after they went back to having an armor version of Sunfire. But anyways, the important thing about Kempunk and Morello, if they don't have this kind of niche passive, is that they are at least slot efficient, so you can buy them in a full build when you have your last slot and you want to upgrade your Executioner or Oblivion Orb. Right? And because this item now grants 200 more HP, keep in mind the AD nerf doesn't really mean it's a nerf because they are removing 10 AD from most fighter items. And essentially you got 200 HP or 300 AD, that's how I would look at it. Plus the build pad got a little bit better, but that doesn't matter because it's your last item. It's just a random thing, maybe you really have to rush it on your last slot. You get a Giant's Belt, like let's say on your 4th item, you can get a Giant's Belt on your last slot and that helps you build it a little bit because you have to really just complete the next item for a soul fight and you based on a weird amount of gold. But this is going to be super rare anyway, the build pad on this type of item doesn't really matter. Either way, 200 HP is almost 600 gold, so you're getting pretty good gold efficiency added to this item. Maybe it's still not enough, maybe you should give him more stats, but at least you get a good amount of HP when you upgrade your Executioner's Calling, so when you play a fighter and you still want to retain your healing reduction, you don't necessarily have to swap it for another item. This is overall a buff to the item, even though it's not that much. On the other hand, Death Dance is getting 100 gold nerfed. It becomes a bit expensive, but Death Dance overall is buffed in the ecosystem overall, because as you can see, most items got nerfed by like 10 AD. You'll see that's the trend with this patch. And Death Dance only got nerfed by 100 gold, while Longsword is 350 gold. So Death Dance is overall buffed, even though directly it has been nerfed. If we look at Eclipse, I would say Eclipse is also at a similar power level. Not only Eclipse is one of the stronger items in the game right now, one of the strongest for sure. The cost went up by 100 gold and he lost the HP damage. But you buy this item for two reasons. You want 70 AD because your champion skill is really well to AD ratios and that hasn't been changed. Very important for Lee Sin, Kha'Zix, this type of champions, especially when you see items such as Black Cleaver dropping a bit of AD, you'll be even more inclined to go Eclipse if you really care about your burst and AD ratios. Especially if you are some kind of... not necessarily especially, but it's gonna be good if you are some kind of assassin that wants to be a bit more sustained about their play pattern. The shield is still the same, which is the great part about the item. And this max held HP damage wasn't even doing that much damage. You'd hover your Eclipse, you'd see it's about a third of what shield you are getting. Maybe in a long game you'd be like 1k damage with your Eclipse. It's not the end of the world, you're not buying this item for the max LD. It's for the stats, it has good output for the ratios of those champions and for the shield. Eclipse is not really nerfed that much compared to other items, really. It's 100 gold and this passive damage. Going to be completely fine. On the other hand, Experimental Hexplate, considering that it's a pretty unpopular item, I think they went a little too hard. If they give it 5 AD back, it's fine. Now, on paper, if you look at it, it's pretty similar stat profile swap to other items. They made it have more HP, and I think since you buy it mostly as a second item on the few characters that usually go for it, mostly for the utility on the haste and its passive that gives you attack speed and movement speed to stick to targets, I don't think that it's a bad change that it has more HP. I think you care more about the HP in the long run. And you're not bar to bar losing 15 AD here. You're more like losing 5 AD and 5 attack speed for a ruby crystal. I think that's a worthwhile trade, because keep in mind, they are nothing most items by 10 AD. So really you're only losing 5 AD here instead of 15. 5 attack speed for a ruby crystal. Maybe you could also buff it by 5 AD, because this item could use a little bit of low, I would say. But perhaps, who knows, maybe it's actually a good item on few niche users. Maybe it has a high win rate and Riot doesn't want to overshot it. Of course, they might look to do a balance patch, maybe even hotfixes to this type of items, so we'll have to see what happens. Guinness's Rageblade is getting a completely fair nerf, not much to say about it. Hullbreaker is getting some interesting changes here. So, the HP went up a lot, though a lot of these characters don't care that much about health, they just want to hit towers. The movement speed went down, but keep in mind, don't look at this movement speed change on items actually being a nerf. This is not a nerf by comparison, they are simply nerfing every movement speed, epic and legendary item from 5% to 4%. That is completely fine. You shouldn't look at it as a nerf, it's really just a reshape of the system. It does lose 25 AD though. So, going down in price by 100 gold, I would say that Hullbreaker could, similar to Experimental Exploit, have 5 AD higher and it would be fine. The thing is that they're buffing the total HP scaling on this proc, so technically you're getting a bit of damage returned here, but the structure proc damage is unchanged. Although, of course, there's also a ratio on the proc damage, so you're dealing more damage to towers based on this extra HP. But I don't know how much you actually care about it. Of course, most of the characters that build Hullbreaker are generally some type of juggernautish champion looking to split push, such as Illaoi or Yorick. And those champions like HP, but they also like AD. So I'm not sure if this change to Hullbreaker is amazing, though it is somewhat neutral, as in it still does the job. You might also be able to get it one wave sooner, so technically it can matter in solo queue to pressure some turrets one wave sooner, especially if it's an objective about to spawn in the near future. But not much else to say about it, it could just be a nerf. Kraken Slayer is losing a bit of AD, and the proc damage is getting reduced a lot. I think this is appropriate because the proc damage on Kraken Slayer is definitely way too high when you compare to what you would expect with items in League of Legends. Keep in mind, at level 18 on melee champions right now, this goes to about 500 damage almost. Why would an item every 3 hits just end up giving you potentially 500 damage on a proc? Doesn't really make much sense. Definitely they have to reduce the damage on this proc, and maybe even other effects like that in the game will be affected in this patch, you will see. I don't mind this at all. Then we have Mana Mule, which only loses 5 AD as well, and also some proc damage. It's kind of similar to Kraken Slayer when you're looking at the nerf here. The bonus AD scaling is getting changed here, completely removed pretty much, and then it's also losing some of the on-hit damage. I do think this item has been overtuned for a very long time. You can just look at the numbers, you can have a feeling for the game. When SGL or JS complete this, their damage becomes pretty ridiculous. I don't mind them nerfing the proc damage. If Muramana ends up being too weak or too niche, sure, they can buff it like 5 AD or something. But the proc damage being nerfed, I think, is healthy for the game. Maul of Malmortius, on the other hand, it's not the most useful item in the game, it's just good, it's solid. I don't think they should have went with a further nerf here. It's a pretty big ratio, so maybe they just wanted to lower ratios overall in the game. It's appropriate, it's just 10 AD, it kind of makes sense with what they're doing to the system right now, I don't mind it. On the other hand, Mercurial Scimitar, is getting its MR reduced and its cost decreased. This is overall pretty neutral. Mercurial Scimitar, you could even say that it got buffed because of how much harsher other items are getting nerfed. Mercurial Scimitar is not losing 10 AD, for example. Still has similar stats. But with 10 MR on the other hand, what Riot is trying to do, you'll see in this patch, is that if an item has 50 MR, such as Banshee or Witsend or Scimitar, they're looking to reduce that to about 40. Because they think it's more appropriate that these squishy type of champions should not be so resistant to magic damage burst, because they're not supposed to tank that many rotations. They should still allow champions that are looking to AP nuke you to function more appropriately. And I think that's alright, as long as they do it appropriately. Then we also have Overlord's Bloodmail, which technically got a slight buff. It lost 10 AD, which they are doing for most fighter items, but it gained 50 health. I think this item should gain even more health, to about 600, because it's something you buy pretty late game, and it would directly synergize with the passive a little bit. I'm not sure what the math is here. I think this item is getting like 1 AD from 50 HP, right? It's 2%. So yeah, technically it's only losing 9 AD. So they did buff this item overall in the ecosystem. But I always thought that Overlord's Bloodmail was released a bit weak. He could use a 50 HP buff further. We can also see a change to Ravenous Hydra, where they did nerf 4 elements of this item. And it is a slightly overpowered item to some extent. So I don't mind all of these nerfs. It lost ability haste, AD, damage on the active, and healing on the active. This is probably the biggest change, because you would be able to have ridiculous healing and sustain in lane. This is definitely going to hurt some champions that build this as a first item consistently. But when it comes to the stat profile, it's not the hugest. No. It might be that it will still need a compensation, who knows, if it ends up landing too weak. But I think, looking at this change, to me it seems reasonable. I somewhat love what they have done with the Spear of Shojin, so they ended up making it differentiate itself a bit more from Black Level while reducing some of the ability haste creep in the game, because Spear of Shojin was the only item that went over 25 haste. Now is getting that reduced by 10 haste on your basic abilities overall. It's losing its normal haste, which works on ultimates, in order to get more basic ability haste. So now instead of getting cooldown on your ult, you're only getting basic ability haste, which is going to hurt champions with really long cooldowns that were building Spear of Shojin, such as Hecarim, volibear. But besides that, it's a nice niche because they also added more HP to it, and overall this item gained a bit of stats from the HP value, so there's 50 gold difference between 10 AD and 150 HP. And it only lost 10 haste, which you could say is bigger gold value than a longsword, which a lot of items lost. So you could say that Spear of Shojin got a bit more nerfed, especially because now it's sort of a long cooldown for ultimates, which is going to make it kind of hard to itemize. So for example, if I'm playing Volibear, which for me is a core user of Shojin, you can build it in a lot of games. That's what I've done on my run to Challenger, very strong item for him. Now, I would probably go Black Cleaver. Not only because I'm getting CDR in my build pet, which this item doesn't, but mainly because my ult cooldown is extremely long early, so I want the ability haste that this item grants, well, the Black Cleaver. There's nothing on Shojin. I think that's the main difference. And of course, this item gives a bit more AD than Black Cleaver, a bit more haste, and it allows you to stack the passive on waves and monsters to improve your jungle clear and whatnot. So it's still gonna have value. It's gonna be more of a trade-off, really. Like, for example, if you play Hecarim, you'll mostly look to buy either Black Cleaver or shojin. Now we'll see if Eclipse is still on the menu. It might be, because he cares a lot about that AD ratio, but assuming you don't build Eclipse, you could choose, well, do I want Spear of Shojin, so my clear is first, my DPS, once I run into a fight with Q stacks and Shojin stacks, is strong, or do I want Black Cleaver, so my ulti cooldown comes up a bit more often? It could even be situational. Or you might even go something such as Spear of Shojin with Ultimate Hunter on some champion to compensate for it. I don't even know. We'll have to see. Overall, I like that they made the item a bit more niche. And I love that it has more HP, because champions are looking to spam abilities when they build this item and just have a sustained combat pattern. This also nerfs it for stuff such as Ezreal a little bit, potentially. Of course, Ezreal is going to care quite a lot about having 150 more HP, but not always. It's going to be lower damage, easier to ignore or reach. Celishiv is losing a bit of stats in a reasonable amount, not much to say here. Seras gauge is losing 5%, this makes sense. This equals to between 5 and 7.5 AD, so it's not even that big of a nerf compared to other items. But the shield is going down quite a lot, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's also because they're adding more HP on other items. I think 70% would be more appropriate. 60% is way too brutal. Strax gauge already got hit by numerous nerfs. It's not in the craziest spot ever. Stridebreaker is losing quite a lot, but keep in mind this is one of the stronger fighter items in the game. Movement speed loss doesn't matter a huge amount, because most of the stickiness power is going to come through the active, it's going to do the job. They made it give movement speed anyway. I think this is completely fine. It's not really going to change Nocturne being able to land his E or Garen being able to combo you if you lose this on damage speed. But the stats are a little bit more brutally nerfed compared to other items. It's more similar to what Black Cleaver lost, 10 AD and 5% attack speed. If it's too weak, Riot is gonna give it like 5 more AD or 50 more HP or something, we'll have to see. Thunder Sky, which is also one of the strongest fighter items in the game, is losing a bit more than others. Is losing 50 HP, 5 AD, 5 haste, and some healing on the passive. Now this item is still gonna do its job very well, so this doesn't kill the item or something like that. It is definitely perfectly viable. You're building it to frontline, though it gets quite nerfed as a first item, which I think people are building incorrectly anyway. I think Thunder Sky is a terrible first item to rush on almost every single champion in the game, and it should be pretty much always purchased if you want it as early as possible as your second item. Your first item should be something like Eclipse, Black Cleaver, Shojin, that gives you more dueling, more potential to gank or kill the jungle camps if you're a jungler. Thunder Sky, not a good first item, even though it probably has good win rates, it's just not efficient enough. It's more of a frontliner item anyway, instead of a more generalized item. That's what I'm looking at these nerfs. So if you're looking to frontline for your team or something like Jarvan and constantly spamming Q, this is the item to go, no problem. Terminus only receives the 5 AD nerf, which I don't understand why they didn't do more nerfs to Terminus, because it's a solid item, but hey, doesn't matter that much. It's reasonable, I don't mind it. Maybe they know something more about Terminus that I don't, because Riot has access to a lot more information than average people in terms of statistics. Maybe Terminus doesn't have the best statistics and they decided to not nerf it as much. Titanic, on the other hand, is getting 600 HP, really putting the Titanic part in the name. 600 HP is quite a lot for a fighter item, which I don't mind, but bonus on hit damage to primary target removed. Now, they could have removed AD, which is also gonna nerf the ratios on certain champions, so you're gonna lose some damage there. and the on hit isn't some crazy amount of damage, so I think Titanic Ira for just wave clearing, the auto attack reset, the burst, is still going to do its job. They even gave it more HP, which means that everything about the item should still be fine, should still be functional. If it ends up being a little too weak, maybe they end up buffing it, but I still see Titanic Ira being completely functional. Because they didn't nerf the AD on it, they just nerfed the on hit. If they kept the on hit and nerfed the AD, you'd be like, well, it's just nerfed by 10 AD like every other item. No problem, I'm fine with this change for now. On the other hand, Trinity Force, maybe not a little bit too many stats. I like that Trinity Force gets a bit more HP. They're trying to do a funny meme here where every stat is a multiplier of 3. Not a big deal with that. I think they could keep the attack speed at 33% though, maybe increase the AD by 3 if needed. Ability haste being lower and HP being up is fine. Trinity Force is primarily used for the passive, for the base damage. You don't really mind losing stats and gaining HP. Ideally, Trinity Force would have as much HP as possible for most fighters, so that you mostly focus on utilizing the passive damage. Any HP given to Trinity Force is fine. Though you have to keep in mind that Trinity Force is a bit of a flex item that skirmishers can look to use, such as Fiora, Tryndamere, Mastery, Yoneyasu, these type of champions. I'm not saying they should build it, all of them, but it should still be retained as an option for them, in my opinion. So you shouldn't look to make Trinity Force fully a Darius or Garen item with lots of HP. This is overall fine as long as maybe they buff the stats up a little bit. Vtuber, on the other hand, is getting way too big of a nerf in my opinion on the on-hit damage. Losing some stats seems reasonable. They also said they want to nerf the MR. This puts it at 45, which you will see they change Negatron to be 45 MR. So if they want to retain the Negatron cloak in the build pad for Vtuber, they have to move it to 45. So it's fair to me. They also said they want to nerf MR on Vtuber mode and whatnot to be around 40. The only damage going that low doesn't make much sense to me. It's just losing a lot of power. I don't think Vtuber is that crazy. It's gonna be a lot better now as a first item because they made it strong early compared to when it gave like 10-15 damage. Well, they've done this change already, so I'm not really talking about comparison, but it should still scale 45 to 65, let's say, if they want to just remove some power from this item. 45 at all levels, it might even be a script issue, it might even be something they're not intending to do. Maybe they fucked something up. Because last time they've done item changes on PB, they messed up how Vtuber was working as well. So, who knows? But this is, if it actually goes live, Vtuber is a bit of a dead item unless it's really valuable as a Russian lane to completely dominate a matchup. The build pad of double recurve bow plus Negatron is really powerful. I gotta mention that. And the tenacity can be useful in certain matchups. Noonquiver is receiving a slight nerf, but it's cheaper, so in that sense it's not the worst thing in the world, especially if you're looking to a Russian item that builds out of Noonquiver. Maybe it being cheaper is gonna help you build into it, although it's losing a longsword in the build pad, so that is pretty bad. I would say this item is overall kind of nerfed. On the other hand, Scout Slingshot, which was a terrible item, is getting a buff. The Elo Slingshot, no big deal. Zilla is getting a nerf, probably because they're also looking to... It seems they are looking to nerf maximum itemization even further. And they also want to nerf mobility. They are directly technically nerfing mobility a little bit by nerfing Zeal, so that's completely fine. Essence Reaver, on the other hand, is getting gutted. I don't understand this type of nerf. They should at least keep some of the AD like 65. I really can't understand this nerf. Now, I do think that nerfing the abilities on Essence Reaver is reasonable, and that is because it does power creep the mobility in the game if Lucian or Paisa or something like that, they end up building Essence Reaver. It gives them 25 haste, which means that the cooldown of their mobility is a little bit too low, and it just contributes to this issue where there's too much mobility in the game. But at least the AD should be higher on this item. I don't like this change that much. I understand that they are looking to nerf it appropriately compared to other items, because for example they are nerfing Infinity Edge by a similar amount, 200 gold and 10 AD. I understand this item should be more of a capstone. It should be the same price as Dead Cap, in my humble opinion. LDR is losing 10 AD, reasonable, not nerfed as much as some other items. Motor Reminder is going up by 200 gold, losing 5% armor pen. If you really care about hit reduction, you're going to Motor Reminder. But now LDR has an advantage over Motor Reminder when you don't need hit reduction that much. You're simply going to go LDR for an extra armor pen, and it's because it's cheaper. Makes sense. Now, what if Flicker Blade and all the Zeal items are losing movement speed, 3% on everything besides PD, which is losing 4%. This 12% was ridiculous, 8% is still quite a lot for autotakers. It's going to be a lot more reasonable. Still good at kiting people and just having a good stats efficient DPS item. But I would say that the Zeal items still have their own purpose. Overall, with how this ecosystem functions, Zeal items didn't get nerfed that much compared to most items. They still have the same crit and attack speed, and they're doing their job. Not a big deal, really. Then we have a change to Yuntal Wild Arrows. So what I'm seeing is that they are making Infinity Edge even more of a late game purchase, while Yuntal Wild Arrows seems to sort of replace Infinity Edge as a rush for a lot of crit champions that perhaps didn't really want to build Essence Reaver or Collector. Maybe it was inefficient anyway, because they're just building it for fun. But hey, it now has flat damage instead of a percentage increase, which is good, because Yuntal Wild Arrows, even though it was buildable and even really strong in a certain item build, it was simply a clone of Infinity Edge. It didn't have a purpose in the item system. Now, since it's flat damage, you think to yourself, do I rush Yuntal Wild Arrows and get a good first item spike to be strong early, maybe on Draven, or do I rush Infinity Edge so I can go something such as Infinity, RFC, LDR on Jhin and be super strong at 3 items and scale harder? So now Yuntal Wild Arrows makes you think about itemization, and it actually has a purpose in League of Legends. And I believe this gets outscaled at around, it should be like 230, 240 AD. The damage it does, it's almost a third, so it should be around 230 AD. So it's going to deal more damage on crits. Now keep in mind, you're not going to have that much crit chance. You're really looking forward to buy this item and then instantly go crit cloak for 600 gold and 40% to make it more efficient. Still really good, especially if your champion has some sort of in-build crit mechanic. I don't know how many of those still exist in the game. For example, Senna still gets some creatures, so it might be a viable item on her, probably not. But we'll see. Let's look at lethality items. So looking at lethality items, you'll see that they removed a bunch of midbeast, and most of the lethality items didn't get nerfed at all. Compared to the whole ecosystem, they actually got buffed. If you look at Axiom Arc, you will see it lost 5 haste, some refund on the ult, while other items lost 10 AD. So Axiom Arc is buffed in this ecosystem. Collector, although it didn't get as severely nerfed as Infinity Edge or Essence Reaver, maybe they nerfed it like this because they wanted to bring it down in comparison to those other items. Obviously, the nerf Infinity Edge, the nerf Essence Reaver, then Collector is going to be best in slot for a lot of characters. It's still going to be built by Samira and stuff, probably. They're just making it really expensive, and I would look forward to them buffing the passive, like, make it 8% max out execute or something. I'm only getting 10 lethality for building such an expensive item. It just seems really redundant. It's not satisfying to build Collector to only get 10 lethality. They should have went under the section of crit items anyway, not lethality. Yeah. Marksman items or whatever. Well, as I said, collector takes a hit here, but for the champions that are good with it, as a first item to transition into crit because they don't want to build zeal items ever. For example, you have collector, infinity edge, LDR, and shield bow. Those are the items you're looking to build on Samira. That's fine. And even if you get it later, let's say you do infinity edge into shield bow, into LDR, into collector, that's also fine. You could be maybe GP and still look to build this item. Age of Night, on the other hand, it looks like it got nerfed quite a lot by 200 gold, but it makes sense. I see what Riot is doing here. This is an intentional change. They don't want an item such as Age of Night that can break certain mechanics in the game to be this cheap. Banshee, Zonia, GA, I think all of these items should be at least 3k gold because of their potential effect in the game. And if you consider that most items are losing a lot of stats, Age of Night being 200 gold more expensive isn't the worst nerf in the world. This item was already a little bit overtuned if you look at what it actually gives. For defensive item getting 15 lethality, like 50 something AD, it's reasonable. This change is fine. Hubris technically is getting buffed. Don't look at this ARAM change, I don't even know why it's here. Losing only 5 AD on Hubris, 5 ability haste on Hubris, you don't care about that. Hubris is practically buffed. Opportunity, on the other hand, is essentially the same item. It lost 5 AD, lost 3 lethality, but gained some lethality here, so it still does the same job. Opportunity pretty much didn't get nerfed at all when you compare it to the system. Didn't get buffed either, but in comparison to the whole system, it's pretty neutral change, still a very good item for the users. Profane Hide, on the other hand, being something that most people can agree on, most overpowered lethality item in the game, having a huge multiplier that makes it scale super hard in the late game, was switched to 80%, which is still a good amount. Lost some of this. It's not going to be a viable item on issues anymore to do this funny 1v2s in side lane when you're a bit ahead. Just 1v2 people with Profane Hydra giving you a lot of AoE damage and healing. That's fine. It did take more of a hit compared to the other lethality items, but it still serves the purpose for its users if you want wave clear, if you care about Tiamat. It's simply not as simple and easy to buy on literally every single assassin, because Profane Hydra on a completed item build is strong on every single AD assassin in the game. Doesn't matter if you're Zed or Rengar or Talon. If you get to full build, even if you buy it as your last item, Profane Hydra is always good. It's like a dead cap for assassins. Serra's Grudge got changed. It lost its lethality and now it simply has 30% armor penetration, got a bit more ability haste, and it got cheaper, very important. It's easier to itemize now. I think this opens it up for more classes of champions, which I really like. Because I used to be able to go something such as a fighter item on Hecarim, Spirit Visage, Frozen Heart, and then when my damage falls off, I would end up building Serra's Grudge. And that will also amplify my healing. For Kayn, Aatrox, Hecarim, these champions that have percentage healing based on their damage. And also if your champion simply cares about burst, to have some threat on the backline when you die. You could also look to build Serra's Grudge instead of Black Cleaver on something such as Illaoi. Or even Yorick, if you care a bit more about your burst, because Black Cleaver takes some time to stack. So in that sense, I really like this type of change, simply opening it up more for an Ezreal, a Hecarim. This was missing from the game. I like this change, it's good. Umberglaive, essentially, when I'm looking at a change like this, I'm thinking Umberglaive got buffed. Similar thing, and Voltaic Cyclosaur got slightly nerfed, kind of a niche item, maybe they should have kept the price, doesn't really matter. Yuumu's Ghost, on the other hand, lost the movement speed out of combat, which was really disgusting. You're essentially getting tier 2 boots out of combat, way too much map mobility. You rush this on Talon jungle, you become the Flash. It's not very nice. But whatever, on top of that, they increased the price by 100, but they added a pickaxe into the build pet, which is quite massive. I would say Yumo's Ghostblade, besides losing movement speed, is maybe very slightly buffed, or at least the same power level of item. Still very useful for characters that want to build something like this. Not a big deal, really. We can also see Elder's Grab nerf. Was definitely maybe a little too strong as a component. Just by 50 gold, because like I said, I don't really see this movement speed reduction as a nerf that much, because they are just reshaping the mobility in the game. Fiendish Codex got buffed, similar thing to Caulfield's Warhammer. I can finally feel decent about buying Fiendish Codex, because it's cheaper, even if you had 900 gold, you can at least maybe sometimes buy a different component, such as you can now go Fiendish Codex plus M-Tome. 50 gold, especially on early buys, is always going to be consistently impactful, especially for certain breakpoints. Like now some junglers are going to be able to buy Fiendish Codex plus Dark Seal if they do Raptor Start, Full Clear, Raptor Krugs into Reset. Now they are going to be able to buy Dark Seal plus Fiendish Codex. Those type of things always tend to matter. Needlessly large rod, I think it got overbuffed when they gave it 10 extra AP. So pulling a bit back on that definitely makes sense. It's just way too good as a component. Especially compared to other things, large rod is just a little bit overpowered. Seeker's Arm Guard, Verdant Barrier, and Oblivion Orb losing some AP. I'm not sure why, except for Oblivion Orb. Oblivion Orb is definitely an overpowered component. For 800 gold, you get such a powerful effect on champions that can generally apply it very easily. So overall, Oblivion Orb is a fine change. Definitely gave a bit too much AP for 800 gold. Now we can have a look at some chapter items as well. We have Archangel Staff, which lost 10 AP and a bit of a shield. Archangel Staff / setup definitely just a bit overpowered. Not by much, but just slightly overpowered. Losing some of the shield is completely reasonable in my opinion. Good change by Riot. You don't want those type of champions to be super resistant to burst anyway. I think it's fine. Banshee's Veil is a typo here, it's actually 3k gold, so they reduce the price, they reduce the MR, which I talked about earlier. They want to reduce MR on these offensive items. They also nerfed some of the AP and nerfed the cooldown. Now I think the cooldown is reasonable because it's a little bit obnoxious to have this every single wave, especially if you are sieging with Baron. It used to be 30 seconds very long ago, and ended up nerfing it. This was 10 years ago, and now we got to a similar spot where maybe they realized, Banshee's Veil, 30 seconds cooldown, maybe we shouldn't have that in the game. But overall the item is a bit nerfed, quite a bit nerfed. Not sure why, because it's not very good to upgrade into. It did lose a bit a bit too much for just making it 100 gold cheaper. So I'm not sure if I agree with this change. On the other hand, Blackfire Torch is getting a buff. To me, this looks like a buff because he lost 10 AP, yes, which most items you'll see are gonna lose anyway. But he traded 5 haste for some more base damage. You're gonna need a lot of AP to outscale this buff on the burn, so if you buy it right away, it's going to feel much better to have Blackfire Torch. It's not gonna scale as well to an obnoxious level if you get some crazy amount of AP, although it's not much of a difference even in late game. I just want to make it a bit stronger early, that's it, because definitely the burn on Blackfire Torch is not very meaningful, and a lot of champions even go like Liandry Rush, because Blackfire Torch doesn't give enough damage as your first item. And yeah, I think this item is slightly better with this change in the new ecosystem. We have Cosmic Drive getting a 10 AP nerf, and then the passive MS is getting nerfed. I'm sure some people are probably gonna overreact on Cosmic Drive losing a lot of movement speed here, but not only this was way too high, 60 movement speed is basically like 15% MS, so this item alone in late game gave you 20% MS permanently as an effect for you. And I don't know how that was even remotely balanced. They thought it was fine to have in the game for so long. Almost like 20 patches or something by now. Cosmic Dive has said this BSMS, even though they end up buffing it, because it turns out if it doesn't have enough stats and it's a bit of a weird redundant item for a lot of champions, people are still not gonna buy it. But now since it has more stats, I think Cosmic Drive is what you care about. You just get it for some amount of mobility, but to have ability haste, health, reasonable amount of AP. This change to Cosmic Drive, you're essentially getting Phage passive here. It's fine. They could maybe give it another 50 HP to be like a really well-defined fighter item if it ends up landing too weak with this nerf. I'm sure Riot is gonna address at least some items. They're not gonna just leave everything as it is. Maybe before it even goes to live. Could just happen on PB these days. Crypt Bloom healing got flattened out a bit, it doesn't scale as well. I think this is fine because if you end up buying a Crypt Bloom to be a little bit more utility on a brand support or a Zerat support, that's completely fine. Lost an AP like most items. Crypt Bloom, completely fine changes, no big deal. Hextech Rocket Belt, on the other hand, maybe Riot Games thinks that this item is slightly overpowered and they already wanted to nerf it by 50 HP. And that's why it took a bigger nerf than other items. I don't know, like maybe if they didn't do this change, they would end up nerfing Rocket Belt on life by 50 HP, you know what I mean? And that's why they remove 50 HP and 10 AP. Perhaps, if it ends up being too weak, they're gonna give it like 50 HP or 5 AP back. We'll have to see. Horizon Focus lost 15 AP and gain 5 haste. And if you're considering that most items are losing 10 AP and you're trading 5 AP for 5 haste on Horizon Focus on these spam spells from range champions, then Horizon Focus actually got buffed. Ever so slightly. Then we have a very reasonable change to the Abyss Torment and a very well designed nerf in my opinion. Yes, it's a big nerf, 20 AP, it's going to hurt a lot of characters, especially because it's disproportionate, but the Abyss Torment was already the strongest AP item in the game, and this makes sense. They didn't touch the passive, which I like. This is why you buy the item on its good users, and it's still going to be a reasonable item to purchase in certain situations, or maybe an Orianna, maybe a Syndra, if you really need it. It depends, sure. The passive is still there to amplify your sustained damage output. And this makes it even more of a like fighterish item now. One thing I would have liked about the Abyss Torment maybe is if it had a bit more HP, but I'm not sure if Riot likes that because you guys remember Demonic Embrace had a lot of HP and then ended up nerfing it and switched it out for AP instead, so who knows. Let's have a look at Leechbane, and I want to open up a deeper topic on Leechbane because I think Riot Games is really missing the mark with this type of item. Leechbane is a Shin item. It's a low cooldown item. Shin is about repeatability. But for some reason, Riot constantly wants to design Leechbane into a burst item. They're removing the movement speed, which they're doing across all items, that's completely fine. Removing ability haste and adding even more AP and a large run. Nerfing the AP scaling because they're nerfing items in general. And overall, this is a terrible change to Leechbane in my opinion because Leechbane should really be redesigned into more of a fighter item for Mordekaiser, Udyr, and this type of champions. Galio even. And leave it just a good option, completely viable, for Fizz, Echo, Twisted Fate, Victor. Not only this AP ratio on the item is still ridiculous, they could simply, since they had to remove movement speed gold value from this item, give it HP. If you simply give this item some health, it's not gonna hurt those type of glass cannonish carry champions that much, or assassins, which anyways have Shadow Flame, Stormsurge, Void, Deadcap, all these type of items, so they don't need Leechbane to function. but it would be a lot more useful for fighters if it simply had some HP. And then you can, now the AP ratio, buff the base damage, which is only 75%. It will be at least 100% of your base AD, or 125, or 150, something like that. And then you can have fun. When Leechbane had 150% AD ratio, I had a lot of fun with Leechbane on Udyr. Just going Leechbane with a bunch of tank items, maybe another AP item in the mix. Just like you would build Trinity Force. It should really be more of a Trinity Force for AP champions. I think that would fill a very good space, and if any Rioter hears this, they should really push this forward, and in Season 15 we should have a Bruiser Leechbane version. Because Leechbane, in most cases, isn't even a functional AP carry or AP assassin items. They still end up building other items a lot of the time. They ended up making Leechbane really popular because they overbuffed it, but now it fell out of flavor anyway, and you don't even see Fizz build Leechbane a lot of the time until maybe late game. I don't think Leechbane should be in this spot. It's a low cooldown item. What is the purpose of having it on Assassin? Just ask yourself the question. 1.5 second cooldown item. Who cares if I have it on Assassins? Just let the AP Assassin build it. It would be the same if Trinity Force would be an AD Assassin item. Doesn't make sense to me. You are missing a cool item in the game by putting it in this space. Luden's Companion is missing a change. The AP got increased to 100, so Luden has 100 AP, 10 haste, which is now a lot more different than Blackfire Torch having 80 AP with 20 haste. This item is going to be more about bursting, nuking, trading, maybe poking squishy characters with like a Zerad Q, which I think is very nice. They should definitely make items more different between each other, and then Malignus is somewhere in the mix with 15, so it's between Luden and whatnot. I have a question though. Seraphim Brace though is still 25 haste. And that makes sense because it's the mana item. Mana is about spamming abilities. So I can understand that every single Lost Chapter item now has a different amount of ability haste. Cool, pretty interesting. I like this. I always like when they do this type of changes. Now these items have all different AP and haste and gold numbers. That's great. It's also gonna have a blasting one in the build pet, which I think is buff build pet for some champs. Because you are looking to nuke people. If you play, let's say, any Malignance or maybe Mazar Malignance. Yes, you like ability haste on those champions, don't get me wrong, but you're mostly looking to nuke people, and they up the ability power of it. That's completely reasonable. Morello, on the other hand, ended up receiving a pretty massive buff. It's pretty much the same conversation as Campfire Chainsword. You want this item to be slot efficient in the late game. Because if I buy Oblivion Orb on Mordecai, I say I want to build an item that is useful. I don't want to build 90 AP for 2k gold. So now with 350 HP on it, it has a broad cast of users where you can get this on, you know, Udyr, Mordecai, even a little bit better for when. Not a lot of champions are coming in my mind right now because there just aren't a lot of just AP fighters. This is also good for Diana, for example. And I like this because it fills up their needs. And just because it has 350 HP doesn't mean it's not good enough to apply heal reduction. Of course, you also have to count Mazar, Swain, all of these champions are gonna like the HP a lot. But it's still a good item if you play Syndra or Orianna and you really care about heal reduction. Although, champion like Syndra or Veigar, they don't care as much about reducing healing. They care more about just one-shotting people before they heal. So, in that sense, it's sort of whatever. Nashor Stood got a pretty big hit here. Not only lost 10 AP, also lost 5% AP ratio. Now, I don't mind this change that much. Definitely the AP ratio was too high on it. Similar to Leechbane, really. But maybe they should give it a little bit of something back, like 5 base damage. Don't get me wrong, Udyr is definitely on the stronger side. It is slightly, maybe just slightly overpowered for its users. Deadcap, on the other hand, it's an overpowered item, in my humble opinion. It gives way too many stats and they have buffed it multiple times. It's very reliable to rush on a few champs and super decent on most of the roster to buy it as a second item. Yes, it's expensive, yes, largers aren't that easy to get, but people are usually just lazy about it. Instead of waiting a bit to get a dead cap, they'd rather buy a worse item. Whatever, not my issue. I like seeing dead cap being a bit nerfed, similarly to how they nerfed Infinity Edge. It's just... they reduces power from the game, they are simply nerfing all items, right? This is completely reasonable in my humble opinion. Then Riftmaker, which is one of the strongest AP items in the game, definitely on the stronger side, is getting 10 AP nerfed, but also losing a bit of damage jump, although now you're getting the Omni Vamp sooner, so like let's say you had a 4 seconds cooldown ability and you used it right as you enter combat. Now that 4 second spell, if you recast it right away, it's going to have Omni Vamp attached to it. So it can matter in some situations. Definitely, like game to game, you're gonna have some situations where you're gonna get an extra spell with Omni Vamp because it stacks faster. But other than that, it's losing a bit of damage. Most items are getting 10 AP nerfs, so Riftmaker, it's a pretty neutral change. On the other hand, Run of Ages lost 10 AP but also 100 HP. The Run of Ages is a pretty powerful item for its main users. I'm pretty sure it also has a pretty good win rate. And I do not mind them going a little bit harder on the Run of Ages nerf. Is it really needed? I'm not exactly sure, it's hard to tell. Riot has a lot more data available than me right now with my LoL Analytics website. But hey. Sting Run of Ages is still going to do its job for its users. Like Crystal's chapter, on the other hand, only lost 5 AP. And I am aware that there's a lot of frustration around this item, because people just don't like getting perma-slot on a cheap item. That also makes the user somewhat tanky for 400 HP. Though this item is falling out of flavor a little bit when they are buffing a lot of other AP items over time, such as, you know, Stormsurge, Shadow Flame, and whatnot. Just think, realize PzZZang would be maybe a little too weak if they went for like a 10 AP nerf. 5 AP seems reasonable to me. I don't mind this change. Shadow Flame, on the other hand, is always losing 5 AP. A little bit of damage on the dot. Shadow Flame already got buffed, so I would say Shadow Flame in this patch is buffed in comparison to the other items. And so is Stormsurge, which is not really losing anything, except some movement speed, which is really whatever. Stormsurge is gonna be a very solid item in a new patch for many champions. On the other hand, Zhonya's Hourglass lost 15 AP, which should be somewhat alright if they want to simply reduce damage from the game. You're buying Zhonya's Hourglass because you want a lot of stats plus the active, primarily the active. Maybe they went too far. Should probably be like 110 AP instead of 105. That's okay, I don't mind it. 5 AP difference is not going to change much about why you buy Zhonya and how the fights are going to play out anyway, so it's not the end of the world. Let's move to tank items. We can have a look at Bami's Cinder. It lost 50 HP, but it got more damage. This ratio was very small anyway, it barely do anything. And extremely important, the non-champ damage to minions and monsters got increased by 25%. So this can be a slight nerf in top lane in some cases. You should definitely not buy this unless you care about wave clear and actually dealing more damage. If you are on the back foot, buying Bami's Cinder is going to be somewhat terrible in top lane, but for jungle is a massive buff. This is massive buff for jungling. It's gonna feel a lot better to have Bami's Cinder in early game. And you'll see a buff to Bramble Vest as well. And as I mentioned before, the tank item space is very unattractive for fighters. which means that overall, that is a defining factor for why the tank item system is weak, it's underwhelming. It's maybe not doing its job as it should. So you'll see the trend here is that some tank items got a little bit buffed, while others didn't get as big of a nerf as some of the fighter, mage, and marksman items. And that is, in my opinion, even though people are going to complain about the tank meta, it's still going to move the game in the right direction, because right now we have the opposite of a tank meta. We have way too much damage in the game, way too many damage dealers, way too many combos with multiple AD carries, even 5 carries combos are common, and you should have an answer. That is not allowing you to play a healthy, enjoyable, for everyone version of League of Legends. Sure, it might be enjoyable for the guy trying to one-shot, come-shot everything with Talon, but for most of the players, it's going to be terrible. And we had a lot of good feedback in Season 12 when they did the durability update. This is essentially a durability update 2.0. They even Riot themselves admitted to that, they have mentioned it. Overall, I would say that if you don't think that tanks are weak, and if you don't think that tank items are just a little bit underpowered, then you are probably wrong. It's just, of course, an opinion, but you can see that in many different ways. Not just by looking at tanks individually. And yes, if tanks end up landing too strong because of all of these changes, which might be possible, they can simply nerf the outliers. Could be Malphite, could be Ramos, could be Oran. And then this whole system is going to be better for other classes of champions, so we can have a better game. I think if fighters buy more tank items generally, instead of going full damage, especially on their last slots, the game is going to be better. You're going to be able to have more fun as a marksman, because you are going to have a front line to play with. You're not going to just get fully focused right away. You're going to have a front line to hit. You're not going to get one-shot by fighters dealing full damage. Trust me, it's a better world for everyone. If you see tanks getting buffed as a marksman, you should be happy, especially as a marksman, especially as an enchanter player. If you see tanks getting buffed and your main character is Soraka, you should be jumping up and down in your room, because this is going to mean that you're going to have a better experience playing League of Legends. That's all I can say, really. Let's just keep moving with these items. I should have probably kept this kind of conversation for the end of the video, or maybe make a separate video. I could do that to go more in depth. But since we got to tank items, I'll just mention it briefly. Let's have a look. Venerable Vest has been really underwhelming for a very long time. Essentially, buying this item is troll, unless you play against heavy healing in lane, like a Warwick or something could be useful, yeah. Glacial Buckler also somewhat underwhelming component. It's getting small buff here, perfectly fine. It only builds into Frozen Heart now, so yeah, Frozen Heart Rush is pretty unviable, and they're also buffing Warden's Mail in early game slightly, so they're making it a bit harder to play into Frozen Heart Rush like an auto-attacking champion against the tank, which is reasonable. I never see a Malphite Frozen Heart Rush into Tryndamere or whatever anymore, so this is just moving it a little bit. And you see that Frozen Heart is also getting a change, which might be a hit in certain situations. We'll have to see. Negatron Cloak is getting some kind of nerf here. Is it even a nerf? No, it's actually a buff. Negatron Cloak is getting buffed. It's rarely gonna be a nerf, and sometimes, yeah, sometimes you're gonna be able to get 900 gold, and then it's going to be a nerf. But a lot of the time, it's going to be a buff, and in terms of gold efficiency, it's also a buff. It's a mix of buffs and nerfs. This doesn't matter too much if you have 5 extra MR or not. It's not the end of the world. You're also going to be able to buy more components in general. There's 50 gold in League. When it comes to breakpoints, if you don't have 50 gold, then you can buy the item. That's just how the game works. If you don't have 25 gold, you can buy the item. So you might be able to fit in a Ruby Crystal, an Amptom, another item, Spectre Scowl, whatever you are building, because this item is cheaper now. Spectre Scowl also got buffed by 10 MR. Definitely this item got a bit over nerfed when they did a change a while ago, when they nerfed its region and so on. And they also increased the price. Spectre Scowl getting a buff, completely fine. And I'll tell you something about Spectre Scowl. This item is supposed to be good in lane. Because if you are playing a tank against a mage, you're supposed to counter that guy. Yes, tanks are supposed to be good against mages. That's the counter to mages, because mages beat everything. Mages are going to beat everything in lane. Marksmen, enchanters, fighters, assassins, to some extent even, depends on the matchup of course. But tanks are supposed to be the champions that are good in lane against mages and throughout the game in general. Because mages have a lot of tools to deal with everything. They have range, burst, some DPS depending on what champion it is, a lot of crowd control, most importantly poke. They hit you from high distance, and tanks are supposed to be there to offer you some engage to reach those mages and also not die to them. While marksman is a class that is easier to reach, builds more glass cannon, doesn't have much CC, but has a really good DPS against tanks. That's how I see the balance in this game. So Spectre Scowl being weak is bad for the game, because if you play Maokai into cannon, you should be able to hold your ground and be reasonable. Nowadays, if you play Maokai into cannon in top lane, you're gonna get completely stomped because of items like this, not have enough stats. Warlord's Mail, you don't really have a ratio, it should be a flat amount, this makes sense. You should care about this passive being good for laning if you are Riot Games. Wing Moonplate finally getting a buff after, like what, 3 years or something? It needs to be 200 HP. It was too low, it only gave a ruby crystal. And now since they ended up reshaping the movement speed system, maybe they felt compelled to give this more HP. They also said I want to buff epic items a bit, this is adding to that. I like it. Very nice change by Riot Games, no big deal. Abyssal Mask, very powerful item for what it does. Maybe it's a bit too over nerfed here if you look at, technically lost quite a lot of magic resistance potential if you're around enemies. You'd not be into 5 enemies if you have Abyssal Mask, you'd be into like 2 or 3 most of the time. In that sense, it lost, let's say, 25-35 MR. Not the end of the world, not really why you buy Abyssal Mask. Went up in price a bit, it's a powerful effect, I understand why it shouldn't be so cheap. Even though you should probably afford it on supports, so I'm not sure what they're doing there. The ability haste also went up to compensate. Maybe Abyssal Mask is overpowered on live right now, I'm not exactly sure what Riot thinks about it statistically. Perhaps they wanted to hit it a bit, and it's still an amazing item for what it does. The MS Plate on the other hand, which is one of the strongest items in the game for the users that are able to use it the best, is getting a massive buff. It's losing movement speed, so they're compensating with other stuff, but keep in mind every item is supposed to get nerfed. So overall, it's getting a pretty big buff here with 10 armor and 50 HP. Not the craziest thing ever, it's not super different power level, it's still going to be weaker at gap closing. Still going to be similar because now the AD carry with Phantom Dancer has less MS. You'll definitely feel this nerf when you're trying to play Darius and reach your target. But having a bit more stats is definitely fine. The MS Plate is still going to be a good item. Force of Nature, the movement speed total went down from 15 to 10%. But the stats didn't get touched at all. You're mostly buying Force of Nature just to have some mobility, so you don't get super kited, and to have a lot of magic resistance in sustained fights. Which means that Force of Nature, in the whole ecosystem, didn't really get nerfed. Maybe slightly buffed in comparison to the other items. It's gonna be a great item for sure. Frozen Heart lost its rock solid passive and gained 10 armor. Well, this is going to be a lot better against spellcasters and stuff like that, especially if you simply care more about the having a good amount of armor, haste, and mana for your character if you're mana hungry and you want to spell abilities. Similar to Fimbulwinter. Which, by the way, Fimbulwinter didn't get touched at all. It does look maybe slightly overpowered since he got so many buffs and didn't get touched at all by any nerf this patch. Also, Void Step. Void Step is also looking a bit too strong. Void Step didn't get touched at all. Those are like the only items I remember didn't get touched. Anyways. Frozen Heart, it might be a nerf in some cases, it might be a buff. Again, keep in mind that every item got nerfed. Frozen Heart still has its 20% of attack speed reduction, which is why you buy it, for the most part. And yeah, it's a decent item. It does its job. Still gonna be good at rushing into certain matchups as a tank, probably. Heartsteel, on the other hand, barely got nerfed, so it's pretty much essentially the same item. It did lose 300 gold value, which is a lot, but it's health regen, so it doesn't matter that much. It's pretty mediocre stat in League of Legends. Hollow Radiance, on the other hand, you'll see a reshape to this Bambi Cinder items, Sunfire and Hollow Radiance. It lost 50 HP, not the end of the world. The base damage went up, and the damage to monsters also went up. So this item is overall buffed. The problem is that Hollow Radiance still has a super reliable passive that I don't like as a game design perspective. It just doesn't make much sense to function like that, in my humble summoner opinion. The item is still buffed though, so in the situations in which it's reasonable to buy it, is going to be a bit better. Iceborne Gauntlet, on the other hand. Now, Iceborne Gauntlet, I think, is for its users, few champions that can utilize Iceborne to stick to targets. It's a really solid, sort of S-tier item. Now they're making it even stronger. They are buffing the slow a lot. If you don't know the numbers, this slow, especially if you buy the Iceborne early, it's like 20-something%. If you have full build, only then it gets back to like 30%. So the slow is massively buffed. It mirrors Relay, Cerillas, and whatever. But damage goes up a lot, and keep in mind, they are nerfing every item, so the cost going up by 300 gold is not the end of the world, because even if they didn't change the slow and passive a lot, this item should have probably still went up by like 100 or 200 gold to account for nerfs, or maybe it would have lost stats, because they are nerfing every item, right? So it going up by 300 gold and getting this much damage, and more slow, is a massive buff to Iceborne Gauntlet in my opinion. And you are looking to buy it more often on certain champions. It might not even be throw on udyr sometimes, just because it's going to deal a lot of damage, but I'll probably still never buy it on that kind of champion, because it really has a perma-slow. So a lot of champions will be able to buy it a lot more often. And I'm completely fine with this. This is great. On the other hand, Jak'Sho, it lost 200 gold in stats, gained 166 gold. So it's somewhat neutral change, except that it synergizes a bit less with the passive, and you'd rather have more resist. You are buying Jak'Sho in late game for the resist. So this item got not very nerfed, because again, they're nerfing every item. So Jak'Sho is about the same, I would say, about the same item in terms of power level. Didn't really get buffed or nerfed. Kenny Grukern also didn't really get changed that much. This is simply the global item pass they're doing to every item. Same thing with Spirit Visage, barely got touched, 50 HP. Spirit Visage is still a great and amazing item to have on a lot of characters. Now let's have a look at some for ages. It lost the stacking amp, but the stacking amp wasn't that much damage anyway, plus it required you to stack it. I believe it was either 50% or 60%. It's not like old Sunfire, which like tripled your damage when you stacked it and you had like the burn on auto attacks. And the damage on it is up by quite a bit, 5 base. It takes a long time to outscale with this ratio. And most importantly, massive change. The damage to monsters went up by 50%. So you can once again have a reasonable clear on tanks and bruisers by going Sunfire Rush. Which is what I'm looking forward to. Not only the damage went up, not only Bummies got buffed, but also 50% increased damage. I tried it on PBE yesterday. I was dealing a lot of damage to jungle camps with this Sunfire. It feels very nice to use, especially when monsters are so tanky right now. And my idea about Sunfire, I would like to talk with Phreak about this. I think he would agree. I think that if you are playing these off-tank champions, such as Garen, Darius, Mordekaiser, Udyr, Volibear, you should be allowed to build Sunfire Edges as your first item if you want to be tanky or if you are behind. If I'm playing against, let's just name a random team comp, Nautilus Samira, Talon Kiana Karen. I would really like to have Sunfire Rush on Udyr instead of buying an AP item that would make me get one shot. I want to be in there and auto-tech people and do my job, maybe even go full tank after that, even if it's something that happens 1 in 50 games. I want it as an option to be like, okay, they have an AD heavy team, I'm playing Darius.
I'm sorry. I don't even know what to build on this phone. Exactly. Oh, I have 1,000 hate.
Yo, somebody, I had a window open and somebody got a raid, so when you get raided on Twitch, the stream starts playing by itself in the background. It just auto plays. Somebody raided that. Anyways, guys, we're already pretty far in this video. I think we only have enchanter items left and some runes after this tank stuff. So as I was saying with Sunfire, if you play Darius against some AD heavy team, maybe some weird sort of carry champion, you should be able to rush Sunfire and be okay with it. Like, yeah, I'm gonna rush Sunfire, have some armor and HP early with some extra base damage, so I'm not gonna deal the same damage as a Black Cleaver or Trinity Force, but I'm just gonna deal a little bit extra damage. And that's just gonna make me feel good about playing out that situation. I think it's reasonable, and I would like them to bring Sunfire Edges in a spot where that is true. Something they are doing with the tank items that you will see with the Stormsurge change as well is that they are making tank items scale better. Tank items scale pretty terribly because they are focused around HP, and they're also not very attractive for fighters because they build, let's say, Black Cleaver Shojin, and then if I want to go Tormail and it only gives me 70 armor, I don't care about the HP, I want more armor to multiply with my HP from items, my base HP, maybe my healing and shielding from my kit. I want more resists. And this is an amazing change for Tormail. Also probably better as a rush because it scales worse on the damage, but the base is a bit better. This is a very good change in this type of items, and as you can see the trend continues with Unending Despair having less HP, more armor. It's also on Frozen Heart, also on MS Plate. Not too many items, but you know, Kenny Kruken, Force of Nature, they already have a lot of resist, for example. So that's fine. Randuin also got changed to have a lot of armor, and they are, by the way, not nerfing Randuin this patch. It's one of the items that didn't get changed, it didn't make it to the list here. Warmogs essentially didn't get any nerf, because they already nerfed it quite a lot. Basically, Warmog is the same item. Which means that technically Warmog is buffed in this system compared to everything else. But that's for most tank items, as we can see. Metal Glass Mirror, not only it was a bit expensive, to be fair, for supports, it also got buffed. Another gold, more mana regeneration. I like that they buff epic items. Chalice of Blessing. Is this like an ARAM item or something nowadays or what? There's no Chalice of Blessing in League of Legends right now, I'm pretty sure. Forbidden Idol also got a lot cheaper. Vericham got cheaper as well. Forbidden Idol is in a weird spot where you could buff it and nobody would really care too much. Especially since they are nerfing enchanter legendaries, and maybe Riot thinks that enchanters are in a great spot, but some enchanters are already shining through with certain items. It might be reflected here. Ardent Sensor is getting overall a buff. It's losing movement speed because it was too big. They're looking to remove the mobility in the game as much as they can by nerfing movement speed and ability haste on items, where it makes sense if it's possible. So it's getting cheaper, more heal and shield power, losing 5 AP, movement speed. If you're playing an Ardent Sensor user, you're feeling alright about these changes. And considering they are nerfing every item across the board, I would say that Ardent Sensor is slightly buffed. Dawn Core, it's more of a dead cap for enchanters. It's slightly buffed, not by much, but slightly buffed, somewhat neutral change. This is okay. Echoes of Hell just getting a nerf. Makes sense, the item is quite solid, quite powerful. Mandate is getting its extremely powerful movement speed removed. 25% for 2 seconds was a lot, even though it doesn't have amazing uptime. This is for sure a nerf to the item, but it still does the job. You buy Mandate to deal a lot of damage, to be like an offensive output for burst, or some poke even. So in that sense, Mandate is still gonna help you blow up people with your team. It's really sort of a stormsurge for enchanters, or a shadow flame. Nicebone, on the other hand, got a pretty reasonable nerf, 100 gold. Locket got nerfed even harder by 200 gold in terms of the efficiency. 10 resists. And these are the strongest support items overall. For them to be nerfed, it makes sense in my opinion. It's just the item pass, so technically they are not really getting nerfed, but you know, some items didn't even receive a nerf at all because they said almost every item, like Void Staff and Randuin. Moonstone Renewer is getting a pretty sizable nerf, and I think this is fair because it's starting to overshadow other items. Moonstone Renewer is a little bit overpowered on live. And if you think about it, the items are crazy. 40% and 45% increase on your chain healing, chain shielding. This doesn't make any sense. This is completely reasonable nerf on top of the stats. Redemption got nerfed. Maybe a little too overboard, but it's a solid item. Whereas Battle Song didn't get nerfed at all, pretty much. And it's one of the weaker items, so I'm fine with that it legit didn't get nerfed. Stop of Flowing Water, the main takeaway is that it lost its movement speed, so you don't just have a lot of random sources of movement speed. Now, if you don't mandate stuff on Nami, and you'll give so much movement speed to your teammates with your passive combined, and it made Nami such a disgusting champion to play against if you're an immobile character, you could not catch anyone. Lucian with Essence River CDR, Navori dashing every 2 seconds, gaining 20 million movement speed from his W, and Nami with more movement speed on Navori and passive and mandate and stuff. Just ridiculous. Complete joke of power creep in League of Legends. Pulling back on all of this is gonna make the game so much healthier to play, and they're gonna have to rely on the Nami passive or Nami Q to kite people, not just tons of broken items that give you mobility and whatnot. And I'm not saying Stuff of Flowing Water was broken by itself, but this is broken to constantly just have perma 10% movement speed out of nowhere for you and your teammates. Even on Karma and whatnot, man. But yeah, it's getting a good compensation. You give a lot more AP to teammates, more heal and shield power, a bit cheaper. Stuff of Flowing Water is still a very good item for its purpose, which is to give more damage to your allies. If you have to kill tanks, you have to DPS, it's good to give your Keshaeuw more AP so she can share it to the front line. Yeah, makes sense. Trailblazer is straight up just getting a buff. This is one of the few items they have really buffed in this patch. They probably considered it was too weak, even though it was nerfed for some good reason. It just had a very high win rate as a rush for every engaged support. And this convergence is also getting some nerf, not with stats, just losing some damage. This is going to make it a bit worse on Hecarim, but that's fine because Hecarim is going to have more items to worry about. Alright, we are done with all of the items now. Little tempo seems pretty reasonable, except the only thing I'm worried about is the increased scaling. What this reads is that you're getting 100% damage increased to your own hit, so it's going to be 60 if you have 100% bonus attack speed. You have to auto-attack 6 times. It's going to give you 30% attack speed for melee at full stacks, and 24% for range. This on hit is reasonable. I just think that maybe you have way too much attack speed in your build, although it doesn't make you go over the cap, so you have to be reasonable. It's going to maybe have a bit too much on hit. But this seems to be okay. Maybe it would be a little bit more balanced if they simply remove this attack speed ratio from it. But it could be alright for a bunch of characters, even if you don't build a lot of attack speed, or you just simply have attack speed from their kit, such as Warwick. This could be a really decent rune for Warwick. But to me it looks more of a marksman rune at the end of the day. Seems decent, doesn't affect characters too much, reminds me of Fervor of Battle. Yeah, I don't mind this version of Little Tempo, it's completely fine. There's no mind on the other hand, it's sort of just simply giving you mana regen. It's now going to give you a little burst of mana on an 8 seconds cooldown. Doesn't really change how the rune function that much. Completely reasonable to me, not a big deal. On the other hand, we have a change to Nimbus Cloak, which seems overpowered. It's not as overpowered on the tier 2, this is the tier 2 version of Nimbus Cloak, which is every spell besides Smite and Flash, I believe. So if you use Ghost, Cleanse, Barrier, Exhaust, etc., you're going to get 28% movement speed now, which is quite a lot. It's only a 2 seconds buff, but it's still quite a lot. For Flash, you're going to get 10% movement speed. Kind of a lot. You get a mini Ghost for 2 seconds when you cast your Flash. So if you go Flash for Flash now, it's going to be even more brutal. But I think the biggest and most obnoxious change is that the movement speed for Smite, this is the only one that I think is overpowered. Sure, you can make this 30, make this 25 to be more balanced, but 12% movement speed for pressing Smite is beyond overpowered in my humble opinion. We'll see though. I just don't think it's that balanced to run into a lane with Volibear, press Smite, get 12% movement speed for 2 seconds. I'm gonna run this on a lot of junglers in a lot of games. What can I say? It's already a decent-ish rune. Especially for this like Vladimir, Darius, Garen type of champions. It was definitely underpowered, but I don't think this is the right change they should do to it. Especially not with Smite. They might even nerf it, man. On the Smite, come on. Now Shield Bash, I think, is entering the space of borderline overpowered. People just aren't aware that on champions that actually have spammable shields and auto-attack a lot, especially bruisers like Udyr, Volibear, Skarner that shield a lot, it does a lot of damage. It out-damages the third row of precision, chip shot, quite a lot in mid-game to late game. In early game it doesn't do that much damage. It's not shielding that much, the shields aren't that big. It lost the resist, which was kind of hidden power. Trust me, I think 90+% of the community, more like 95%, they don't even know that Shield Bash grants resists. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's like 99% of League community doesn't even know Shield Bash grants resist for some reason. Just trust me, you ask random League player, they don't even know this. these are pretty high ratios. It's going to deal a lot of damage. Shield bash is going to deal a lot of damage, man. They might have made a rune a little bit too OP, but we'll see. We don't have to worry about endless elixirs replaced by Tamartoni because they confirmed that this was an experimental thing that made it to PBE by mistake, and they will not introduce something like this until season 15. Last thing in the patch is biscuit delivery. No longer grants mana at all, and it's simply gonna give you up to 90 max health, restoring missing health. Manaless users will always getting 12% anyway. This is gonna be a decent rune. Definitely there was way too much cheap mana in the system with the biscuits, and most people are just taking it, oh, I'm a bit mana hungry, I guess I'll go biscuit and have a lot more spellcast in lane. It is what it is. It was definitely a bit cheap, and now it's gonna be more of a situational rune that you kinda have to think more about using. First thing that comes to mind is bad matchups in top lane. Like, let's say you play a Mundo, you get more max health, you can sustain your lane a bit better. But it can be used by a lot of things. And 90 max health is quite a lot as well. I could even see this, let's say you play a jungler that is focused around skirmishing early, such as Belvet, okay? You go magical footwear, which you usually like, you take this, your max health is going to be up by 90 at level 6, and also in early game, you're gonna have healing in skirmishing. You just pop this biscuit, and you're healing as you are fighting people. And then you still get something that scales. The 90 max health is never gonna be useless. You can tank 1 or 2 extra auto attacks depending on the stage of the game. Or abilities, of course. I could see that happening. Why not? Anyways, guys, that's it with this video, with this whole review. I might make a deeper dive on what I think is reasonable for League of Legends. Besides the TikTok brain-rotten ADHD community, which really loves one-shot, camp-shot, Riot is moving the game in an amazing direction. I think most people have a lot more fun playing League in the next patch. Sure, maybe they went a little overboard with nerfs to marksman items, and those people are not gonna have much fun playing the game, although they should be happy that tankier patterns and tankier champions are gonna be in the game, because what do you hate as an AD carry? Getting one shot when you don't even play against an assassin, man. And at the end of the day, if they make combat slower, right? If they make combat slower, that buffs AD carries a lot. So I think them nerfing AD carries items a little bit harder than some other items is probably the best thing to do. Because this is what happened in the last durability update. AD carries became extremely overpowered pretty much right away, simply because they made the combat a lot slower. And that is the class that benefits by far the most from slower combat, not getting one-shot by cheap things. Yeah, for sure. I can kind of understand why Riot made this. If you made it this far into the video, then you should keep this in mind. I might make, again, a deeper dive on this subject, maybe some Twitter posts. I've already been talking non-stop for 2 hours, so let's just stop it here. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to drop a like, subscribe, and maybe if you really like this, and some people have really bad opinions, link them this video with a timestamp. Share it around, wouldn't mind it. Make some clips for fun. Post it somewhere, I don't care. Thanks for watching, guys. See you, and I'm very excited to play the Split 3 fresh on the ladder. Bye bye.